All right, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing good, doing good. Okay, so I got one main topic to talk to you about, but before that, I had a podcast the other day and somebody brought something up and I thought it wasn't challenging, and then I realized I think it is challenging. Essentially what they said is if if they're not vegan, but they care about suffering and they eat eggs, would it be better for them to not eat eggs at all or to eat free range eggs to support the idea of free range eggs existing? Now, now I thought this was a bad idea. At least I didn't think it was a good idea. I think it would be better to not support either. But it made me wonder. So, like, let's say in the wild a chicken would lay like two eggs a month or something like that, or maybe three, and because of how we bred them they lay eggs every single day. And so even the free range ones are going to lay every single day. But if I, let's say me, a vegan who doesn't think people should eat eggs, if I started a farm and I could find wild chickens and create a company that would have eggs that truly are free range, no animals being harmed aside from the slavery of these chickens, which I don't approve of, but I approve of way more than I approve of having more chickens that were bred to suffer through laying an egg every single day. If this farm existed, whether I created it or not, and they needed a certain amount of people to keep it going, like, so let's say that there was like 900 and something people that wanted to purchase this, but they need about 1,000. I can't figure out how to not view it as it would be more beneficial to purchase those eggs and keep that company going than to abstain from that company go under, and then the best products available for eggs would still be so much more harmful than that company if it would have kept going. So sorry
You
for the
know, so
mouthful, but
well, I'm wondering in that scenario, so if that farm closes, those chickens are going back to the factory farm, or are they just being released into the wild, or what?
let's say they're being
That
released
kind
back
of
into the
matters.
wild.
Okay, because that to me kind of makes a difference. Because I'd say, well, being on a free range farm, I mean, assuming that we're talking about the idyllic version that people would like us to believe exists, would obviously be better than going back to a factory farm. And then, of course, people can always bring up, well, in the wild, they're going to get eaten by predators or whatever. So it almost sounds like we have this idyllic free range farm that's almost just like an animal sanctuary where they just happen to
Hmm.
collect the eggs. It almost sounds like what you're saying. And my thing with that has always been, if the eggs are going to go to waste, it would be better to eat them than let them rot. But that
Hmm.
being said, um, chickens do consume their own eggs for nutritional reasons. So we'd have to
Hmm.
truly be looking at a situation where the choice is you eat them or they rot. And I've never really been on a chicken farm. I haven't worked on one or anything like that. So I don't consider myself an expert here. I know that like one of the reasons that Peter Singer is okay with eating eggs is that he thinks like, well, the chickens don't seem to mind when you take them. And it's like, well, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And I think it depends on their conditions and the
Yeah.
stresses that they're under. So I don't know. I feel like that there's a lot more data points I need to know before I'd say for sure on that. But I do know of a couple of free range farms, like because for a while I was trying to do the whole ethical omnivore type of thing before I
Hmm.
went vegan. So there were a few farms that I thought, okay, it looks like they're doing their best to do the right thing, um, and even investing in the technology that would prevent all those baby male chicks from being ground up alive the way that the industry does.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I thought those were positive things at the time. But yeah, I think it really depends on the overall set of conditions and then just whether or not those eggs are they're just leftover products that are going to go to waste, or if, the chickens really do need them for their
Yeah.
own. health reasons.
Yeah, no, and I think that would factor in as far as if the company needed 1,000 customers and they had 1,001 customers, then I think
Mhm.
that information would affect if you drop off being that extra one. You could say, I don't want to put more harm than is needed. But I think if they have 999, even if they get benefit from eating their eggs, and if you take it away, you're harming them, you're harming so much less than if you take from a typical factory or from even a typical free range factory, that I would think I would think so I wouldn't eat it. So even in this case where I think it
Mhm.
would be more vegan to purchase it than not, I guess I would purchase it and give it to somebody that eats eggs, so they would buy one less egg or one less dozen eggs somewhere else. But
Well, yeah, I mean, like in there are so many scenarios you can come up with where there's obviously a better option and a worse option. So if the question is what's the better option, well, then I think that's obvious here, you
mhm,
know. But then I would want to ask further questions that would go outside of the hypothetical. If we're just going to stick to that, then yes, I think it's clear what the better option is.
mhm,
But then I'd want to ask that person, well, why do you feel the need to eat eggs anyway?
yeah.
Like, why is this such a thing that you absolutely must do? I mean, I'd want to go a little further, but I mean, just sticking to what you brought up, sure.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And another thing that popped into my head while we were talking about this, that I was thinking about the other day, because I had a talk that was about if we should stop things from suffering. And I was mentioning how
Mhm.
I saw a cat attack a bird. The bird had a broken wing. I didn't think there's any coming back from it. So I took the bird out of its misery. And then I was
Oh, by the
thinking,
way, I just want
oh
to
yeah.
say real quick, I have done that exact same thing.
Oh, okay.
So go on.
Um, and then I was thinking about how we breed animals to do certain things. And so to, if we breed chickens to lay one egg a day when they're supposed to lay one or two or three a month, and this is a painful suffering thing, if a chicken was just, I don't know, let's say at a sanctuary, but it was going through this suffering of laying an egg every single day just because we bred it that way, similar to how we breed a pug to not be able to breathe well. Would there be a certain amount of level of suffering that that animal would be going through doing its natural act, but it's natural because it was unnaturally bred, that it would be better to euthanize it than to have it keep going through that? So I don't know how much suffering a chicken goes through from laying an egg, but I just wonder, is euthanizing just saved for its deathbed, or could it be to remove suffering for its entire life?
Okay, so I mean, I'm just doing kind of a quick search on is it painful for chickens to lay eggs, and there doesn't
Mm,
appear to be a consensus around it. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
mm,
But if you have young chickens laying very large eggs, they do display clear signs of pain. So I don't know. Maybe
mm,
as they age, it would be less painful. I don't know. There are some vegan websites that saying yes, they do feel pain. There are other, of course, pro-industry websites saying no, they don't feel pain.
mm.
So I don't know why I was expecting there would be a clear answer on this, but I
Yeah,
probably want
I thought it was
to.
so obvious, like, but not from obvious that it should just be obvious, just that I've heard it so many times. So
Mhm.
I guess, yeah, I'll want to double check that before I say that
Also,
any further.
on one vegan website I'm on, it says it acknowledges there are not excellent studies on how chickens feel when laying eggs. So
Hmm.
um,
I had always
I
heard
mean,
that it uses up a wild amount of calcium from their body, and it just like takes a big toll on them.
all the more the reason that they need to consume some of those eggs that they are
Hmm.
forced to lay. That's why they consume the eggs to restore the calcium, according to what I've read.
Hmm.
So, and then this website points out, and I mean, we all know this from going to the store. Some eggs are bigger than others. And it makes sense intuitively that, the chicken to egg size ratio is going to play a role in whether or not they feel suffering or how much suffering. So I'd say you take that on a case by case basis. And yeah, I think if we're looking at a situation where you've got a chicken with a small body that is laying large eggs over and over again, I don't know. It might be merciful to euthanize them, but I'd want to know a little bit more before I committed to that.
For sure. Yeah. Okay, so now to the main topic. I watched a video of a guy, that a YouTuber that I'm going to be talking with, who talks about a vegan utopia, and his stance basically goes something like, it would take a civil war type thing to get veganism to get anywhere. That if vegans wanted to make something go into law, there are going to be enough people that are going to put their life on the line to fight for their ability to have to eat animals. So I guess what I'm curious to hear you go through, and then maybe I'll stop you here and there to counter some ideas or something. I'm curious to hear your thoughts of, starting right now, what it would look like to go from now to the most likely possible vegan situation, if all cards were played right, aside from people that are non-vegan just deciding to be vegan today. What would the process look like to get to a mostly or more vegan society?
Oh, well, I mean, as much as I would like for the ethical arguments to catch on, and I mean, they have to a certain extent, but not enough. I mean, here in California, Prop 12 passed with a pretty good margin. I think over 60% of Californians who voted to put restrictions on the pork industry that the pork industry did not want, and they understood that. And I'm not saying that we were establishing some kind of utopia for pigs here. I mean, they were still going to be on factory farms. They're still going to be slaughtered. But the idea was that these crates that they put the mother pigs in, were too small, and the legislation required not only more space, but that California no longer do business with states that did not have these we would no longer buy the pork of state made by states that did not have these standards and regulations. Now, this bill in and of itself, I mean, it was already inadequate in and of itself. It was never really enforced. And it's being debated by the Supreme Court. I think still, I don't think they've ruled on it yet. But at the same time, it's like they understood that people in the state understood that prices were going to go up, that they'd have to pay more for this product, and they still voted for it anyway. So there is something there when it comes to the ethics, but I don't think it's ever going to be enough. So for me, I've always said there's going to be two things that get us to the vegan world that we want to see if we ever actually get there. Number one is more governments recognizing all that. I'm saying this now, and that the IPCC report just came out, the National Panel on Climate Change report just came out, and I've been reading about how, because what I've always said is like governments are going to realize that factory farming is destroying the planet. They're going to they're going to take more measures over time, and they're going to do it for environmental reasons, just out of necessity. And yet I just have been reading about how the meat industries they were effective in getting the language in that latest report on climate change toned down. toned down. It was originally going to promote plant-based diets as essential to combating climate change, which they absolutely are. And they got the language toned down to something more like, well, diverse diets or something like that. Like they got the specific references to meat diets and plant diets kind of either taken out or watered down, which kind of throws up an obstacle right there. One of my talking points was always that, yeah, the governments are going to no, maybe not. Maybe that industry is too powerful. I don't know. It's something we're still going to have to be fighting out, apparently. The other thing, though, is technology. I mean, and look, I live in the U.S., where where there's going to be a lot of resistance to um, lab meat, you know, meat grown from cells, stem cells, or whatever, or
Mhm.
fermented meat, or whatever you're talking about. A lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of just crazy anti-scientific, pseudoscientific, diluted nonsense that half this country believes. So it'll be hard for it to catch on here. I think around most of the rest of the world, though, there'll probably be a more easy acceptance of that. And so I think technology is ultimately going to get us there. I think once people see that it tastes the same, it looks the same nutritional, and I've seen people online, skeptical omnivores type saying, well, if it's as nutritious as, animal flesh, I'll eat it, or I'll try it.
Mhm.
Which I believe it will be. I don't see any reason to think it wouldn't. It's grown, it's the same stuff. It's just we're getting it in a different way.
Mhm.
Um, so, half of them, the US and then pockets of conspiracy weirdos in other countries aside, I think there'll be a critical mass of people who are willing to make that shift
Mhm.
to the fermented or cultured meat and dairy products. And that will lead to hopefully the end of factory farming. Now, the end of factory farming alone doesn't guarantee a vegan world, but I feel like
Mhm.
that's the big one, right?
Yeah.
We get rid of factory farming, and I feel like those other dominoes are going to fall pretty quickly.
Mhm. Well,
We're
here,
talking,
let me cut you off
yeah,
real quick. I just
sure.
want to say, it's interesting with the lab meat. Back when it was first talked about, when Super Meat, I think on Kickstarter raised a few million. Everybody I asked that eats meat, when I mentioned the idea to them, they all said, "Oh, of course, I would never eat meat again if this existed." And I'm talking like hardcore meat eaters. But
Hmm.
now that it's getting closer and closer to a reality, I have seen some things. I've seen some like podcasters talk about how it's man-made and it's not going to be good for you and don't do it. But here's where I think it'll win people over, because most people care way more about money and convenience than anything else. If
Hmm.
the government subsidizes it and does not subsidize the factory farm stuff anymore because of trying to, let's say, fix climate change, um, if the price of meat today becomes what the price of the lab meat is, and then meat from any farms of any kind just skyrockets in price. No, people already don't care about their health. They're eating hot dogs and chicken nuggets and stuff. They're not going to go, oh, I won't touch this lab meat, I'll go spend extra. They're currently, even if they know like hormone is in beef, they're not going and getting hormone free beef at the natural food store. So there might be some strange political push to convince them not to eat the lab stuff. But if the government makes the right call and makes it less expensive, then I think it'll work.
Well, that is part of it too, the subsidy structure. And I mean, the reason I don't even mention that anymore is because it's so entrenched. Um, but then again, as you're kind of pointing out, like I think this only really goes mainstream if the government actually shifts some of its priorities when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to subsidies and things like that. Like there's going to have to be a major push for this, and I think governments are going to play a role. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they, I don't. It to me, it has to be competitive for it to get that critical mass of consumers. If it's more expensive, I mean, you're absolutely right. So I just don't know how we're going to get those agricultural subsidies. I mean, it's just they've got their hands all over everything, and it's just sad to me that you got all these conspiracy theorists who think that like Bill Gates wants to put 5G in their blood through either first it was through vaccines, and then you have Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about Bill Gates fake meat grown in a peach tree dish because she's an
Yeah,
idiot.
I haven't seen that yet.
But
That's
but
funny.
they think that that's where they see the conspiracy, and they don't see the conspiracy with all of these interconnected agriculture corporations, animal ag corporations, bribing governments, millions on lobbyists. They have a revolving door with these regulatory agencies. That's the real conspiracy. It's big meat is the big conspiracy, not
Mm-hmm.
people trying to come up with lab-based alternatives. The cultured meat, the fermented meat, whatever. That's not the conspiracy. Those are startups. those are startups doing the capitalism that they love so much, or they say they love so much. Um, and I do think governments need to get involved, but right now it's still at the, like that startup phase. It's this little company, that little company doing this research and that research, and that's why it hasn't gone mainstream critical mass yet. Is
Mhm.
the big meat corporations that are doing the conspiracies behind the scenes to keep everybody locked into that paradigm. So that's just another thing where I think we need to push back on the rhetoric and the propaganda. Um, but yeah, I think that's it on that.
Yeah, well, and I think another element of how you were talking about it might not end animals from being killed at certain farms, but it'll end factory farming. Once a certain amount of people are on board
Yeah.
with the super meat, I think it'll become just like most things where it's taboo to, racist people aren't going to come out and be racist in public because it's not accepted right now. So at the point that it's like 70-80% of people are like, oh, this exists, I don't have to harm any animals, and if I eat this, I'm harming animals. They can't see it today, they can't see it right now for
No.
some reason, and I empathize with that. I get it. It's not everybody can see, but they can't see it today. But when they switch over and they're not doing it anymore, they will see it. And once there's so few people consuming it, then it'll be a thing where if anybody's getting it from like small farms, they're going to have to hide it. They're going to have to like, they're not going to be eating it in public. They're not going to be announcing it. I mean, some of the extremists will, but I think it'll become a thing if it's truly perfected. Even if it were healthy to eat animals, if it's truly perfected to make what would happen scientifically, then I think it would get to the point where it's kind of like somebody smoking a cigarette, but knowing that they're going to be judged for it, so they do it in their car or, hiding somewhere doing it. And yeah, I think that's gonna probably be
Yeah.
the route it'll go. Now, the
And
difference, I think. Oh, sorry, go for it.
no, no, no. Well, if you had more to say, I don't
No,
want to.
I was gonna
Well,
do something
I was
else.
gonna say
So,
a lot of these, what'll happen is, I mean, it'll probably be a continuation of what happens now because, like factory farms, they are regulated. Now we know that the regulations aren't really enforced, that they're not adequate, that no vegan can look at the regime of regulation that exists now and say, oh yeah, this is fine. Obviously, it's not fine.
mhm,
But as long as their regulations exist, theoretically, at any point, any slaughterhouse, factory farm could be inspected. Um, when the public brings attention to problems at some of these places, they get scrutiny. Whether they
mhm,
lose a lawsuit in court or they have to pay fines or something like that, they don't want to deal with all of that. Um, Whereas you have these smaller farms, these so-called local farms that we hear that everybody on Twitter, 99% of meat eaters on Twitter, I don't know if you know this, get their meat from a small local producer. I'm obviously being sarcastic.
mhm,
Um, but those farms are often worse than even the factory farms because they're not really regulated. They're kind of under the radar. And
mhm,
so some of the worst stories that I've read of animal abuse on farms don't necessarily come from factory farms, but from local farms that go under the radar. And then, one day somebody decides to report them and then they get completely closed down. So even if we shut down all the factory farms, which we absolutely should do, there will still probably be like, just like we have illegal cockfighting and dog fighting and stuff like that.
mhm,
There will be illegal farms where animals are still being tortured. So obviously we'll have to do something about that. But what I was referring to also was, we will still have other areas like animal testing, the circus, the zoos, um, all these other uses of animals that are just completely wrong. Those
mhm,
domino, as I was saying, those dominoes will fall too eventually. Um, but factory farming is the big one.
mhm. Yeah, maybe a law can go into place that you can own pets and you can eat animals, but every other use of animals for money, like circus and stuff like that, there could just be something passed saying that you can't use them. I don't know
Right.
how they would
I,
approach that,
like
but
I saw the other day, like in Texas, they do something called hog bagging, where they just terrorize these animals for fun. In another state, they throw chickens off a roof for fun.
And it's
These are
legal?
fun. These are family fun events where they get pigs, chickens, whatever together, and they terrorize them, and they all have a big laugh. And I absolutely would make that illegal and shut it down. And if I was emperor of the universe, I'd throw them in jail too. But I don't
Mm-hmm.
think the majority of people would necessarily want that. Maybe fines or something, but just shut it down. And wherever it exists, shut it down. Um, I mean, so that's the kind of stuff we're talking about too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think the throwing in jail, I definitely agree after it becomes illegal. Now, people doing bad acts that are illegal, it's just such commonplace that it would be hard to view it as anything other than the person justifying it by it being legal. But I agree with you. To make it illegal, throwing chickens off a roof,
yeah.
that's
It's called the chicken toss. The good family fun. I think I forget what state it was in, but
one of my least favorite things that seems like it would take a while to get rid of just because rodeos are so common, or at least common enough, is the tying the rope on the bronco like so tight that I think it's a bronco. Is that what they do? Bucking bronco? Or
yes, yeah,
anyways, a bull or whatever. Tying it so tight that it makes it want to kick the person off. And I just can't believe that that exists.
right, right. It's one of those things that makes me just not want to care even about like global warming or like let let it do its work and wipe us out because if this is the kind of stuff we're going to do with our time with our freedom, I don't even know if we deserve to be saved from these things, but I'm
Mhm.
going to continue to say that we should work for an end to that stuff. But
Yeah.
I have my moments where I'm just like I don't even care anymore. I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
just let the meteor of death come and wipe everything. I don't. Just no more suffering.
Right?
Uh,
Yeah,
I
it's
but
kind of
anyway,
a bummer to feel so much empathy because I'm with you.
yeah,
And it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. We just happen to be born with a wild amount of empathy, but it's very irritating to see people with such lack of care
yeah,
exist around us. I don't know if I necessarily think humans are worse than other species, which people usually say. It's just such a different can of worms. Like the animals in the wild are doing what they're doing. So many are struggling to survive, whether they're the prey or the predator. And the wild is just this crazy thing. But it is weird to see that we have this ability to rationalize and to have empathy, and then we don't. So I guess it just makes me wonder if certain people just don't have that ability or if it has to do with how they're raised. But it's hard to live with, that's for sure.
mm,
Um, but yeah, what the I I think you might be right. I don't know how likely it is to get enough people in the government to come to a consensus on global warming. I don't know exactly to what it's going to take for that. But I do think that if my thoughts on what will lead a world to veganism um doesn't work, it's because super meat will beat it to it. I think super meat is going to have a huge impact. But setting that aside and imagining that was 100 years away, really the only thing I think that could make a huge change is if we change how we approach the idea of we have vegans and then we have everybody else. I think we need to make it acceptable for meat eaters to care about animals. And I think most people would. And now a lot of people will be like the Twitter people you're saying, where they'll lie and say that they get it all sourced from whatever. But I think there are a lot of people out there that if we all had our focus on let's end factory farming and let's figure out ways to get a bunch of people together, everybody's just like it's the most commonly thing talked about. It's right up there with all the different political things people are talking about, abortion and trans stuff and race stuff and ending factory farming, then I think a lot could be done. But the problem is When you see vegans talk to people and they're saying the thoughts I'm thinking, but thinking that maybe we shouldn't be saying, when you hear like Earthling Ed talk to people, and people will talk about like that they hate factory farms and they want to have like humanely kill animals, and then Earthling Ed will say, well, how can you kill humanely? And I agree. Obviously, you can't kill humanely, but that's the problem. We're always taking the conversation to that level, and we don't need to change how we feel, and we don't necessarily need to stop talking about that and hoping for full on veganism. But maybe we should be spending more of our energy getting all these people that agree with us that aren't vegan to all of us together change the parts we do agree on. And then once those are changed, then we could try to like change the hearts of people to the other elements too. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I broadly agree with what you're saying. There has to be a line on factory farming. Like, you can't support that. I'm not going to consider anyone my ally or comrade or whatever, who is indifferent to or is actually in favor of continuing factory farming. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that has to go. That can't be a point of debate. Outside of that, yeah, I'm willing to be a little bit more flexible, but still, I think people need to be nudged along the path to veganism, and which to me is an ethical position. It's not just a
Mm-hmm.
diet. It's not just about not eating a steak. It's about the clothes you wear. It's about the products you use. It's about your choice of entertainment, as we were just discussing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Insofar as possible and practical, as the common definition goes. So that's going to look different for some people. And some people rely on, medications that are derived from animal testing. What are we supposed to do? Tell them not to take their medication? That wouldn't be reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are, I think you have to be committed to at least gradually, if not immediately, removing things from your life that are the direct products of this system of, torture and murder. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not big, like, there's some vegans, like, I'm sure you're familiar with Gary Francione,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh no, well, he's a professor, I think, at Rutgers. He's on Twitter all the time, which I don't know where some of these professors like Jordan Peterson and this guy like, have all day to sit on Twitter and argue with people, but he's on there and he's arguing, and he's like just a hardcore vegan absolutist, and I mean, I try to be a little bit more flexible with people, but I still think you need to be moving along that road. Um, and so I guess that's kind of where I start thinking about that. I think, but when specifically what you started talking about, where we have to make it okay for um, meat eaters to care about animals, and I know that most vegans, they jump to hypocrisy. You can't possibly care about animals if you are eating meat, and I know that most meat eaters don't see it that way. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, well, okay, if you don't care about factory farming and what goes on there, I don't think you really care about animals. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if you're claiming to and you're really doing it, you're doing the whole free range, pasture raised, organic, local. I know my farmer. We know the names of all the animals in in the pasture. I mean, that kind of idyllic stuff. Let's say you're actually doing that. Well, I mean, I think there's a sense in which maybe you wouldn't be a total hypocrite in saying that you care about animals. Just same way with like indigenous people who hunt. They sacralize that process. They don't just go out and kill everything they see and uh, you know chop it up and put it on the market for sale. I mean, they're really using it. Now, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying that I totally agree with that. If there are alternatives, I don't think that should be done. But I think that is on a different level than what's going on in the factory farm. So
Mm-hmm.
I really think it depends on the person and what exactly they are consciously participating in or endorsing. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think if you're just like eating hot dogs or whatever like that, that is torture, fear, and death, in a bun. You
Hmm.
can't possibly really care about animals if you just don't care about where that comes from or how that happened.
Yeah. Well,
In my
especially if
view,
it's
in
not,
my view,
if especially if there's zero benefit. Like
yeah. I mean,
even someone like Jordan Peterson or Michaela Peterson that eat only animals, um, wouldn't eat a hot
right.
dog and wouldn't condone it. So that's when you
But
know.
not, but I don't think they, but is that for ethical reasons or for health reasons?
Well,
Like,
no,
they
it's
just,
for health reasons. But my point is,
yeah.
if you're going to claim that you need meat for health and that you
Hmm.
care about animals, you need to at least be eating meat that someone thinks can be healthy. If you're saying you need this to survive or to be healthy, and you're eating a hot dog or a corn dog or a deep fried anything, chicken
Right.
nuggets,
You're
then
you're really full of it then. Yeah.
yeah, and so at least people can hold people accountable. So if you get somebody to make this claim, to say like, yeah, I'm just in it for the health, and and so some might say like, okay, I'm only going to get it from like free range farms, and they might not, but if their friends are around hearing that, and then they talk about it more, and then somebody sees somebody eating something, they go, hey, I thought you want to do this thing, and then they're like, oh no, good point, I need to get to it. Like you'll probably have 99 out of 100 people that say they want to do free range stuff, um be full of shit. But if you talk to 100 people and 99 of them are full of shit, you got at least one that's probably making some kind of a difference. And then I don't know what the exact answer is, but I feel like there's
Mhm.
this idea where meat eaters that probably would make some changes, when they're confronted with this idea of you need to go vegan, and they think about it, I can't go vegan, I can't not eat meat, dairy, or eggs, of course I'm not going to, and then that's the only question involved, then nothing's happened. Where if they're just having if vegans all were just loving, caring, kind people, just having great conversations about, like if you care about this dog, then maybe eat a little less meat, or eat this or that, or stay away from stuff that would be factory farm. Don't eat meat at
Well,
fast food places.
right. I mean, look, and there's a part of me that agrees with all that and says that's very sensible. But then I think, sometimes I think, Gary Francione is right, and I think his kind of critique of that, and I may be getting him wrong, but from what I gather, I think his critique of that, and I think there's merit to this, is that if you tell people that that's okay, then that's where they'll stay. Like, well, I
Mhm.
did this, now I'm a reducitarian. No, I eat a little less meat now. I'm doing the right thing. And they're just comfortable right there. And there's a danger of that happening too. That's not the goal. So if
Mhm.
somebody confuses a step along the way for the end destination itself, I think we've kind of messed up somewhere. So it's kind of a delicate balance, but I think we need, like I said before, like I think we need to be nudging people along. So I'm willing to say, okay, I'm great. I'm glad you came this far. That's a good thing. But
Mhm.
you need to go now. We need to go a little further, and you need to take the
Mhm.
next step. And if they're not willing to do that, then we kind of have a problem. I think I'm not willing to settle for um, like just this halfway point, as the final destination. I may not be, and some vegans will say you got to give it up all up right now, or you're a terrible piece of crap. I'm not willing to do that. I realize that everyone kind of goes at their own pace, and I'm okay with that. But you got to be going at a pace, and something a little more than a glacial pace, right?
Yeah.
I think real improvements need to be made. At least if in my view, if you for them, in my view, to not be like a total hypocrite, they need to be making
Mhm.
some progress. And I mean, maybe they don't care what we think as vegans. They're just gonna be a reducitarian, and they're fine with that. But I don't want to be the one who says, "Oh, good for you. You're a reducitarian, and you are now obligated to do nothing further." I don't want to imply that. I don't certainly don't want to say it, and I don't want to imply it either. So
Yeah.
I feel like we have to be gently nudging people further down the path.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like if you tell somebody, "Oh, good for you doing this," and they go, "Oh, good for me. Oh, you do this too. You're not vegan. You're not going for this." And it's like, no, I think we shouldn't do any, but you're doing this great thing. Like so much of it's a conversation. But look, I think what we have to do, because we want to change, we want change to happen, and so there's two things that can happen here. We can announce what ultimate change we want, which is fine, and then we can do what needs to be done to make the change. Now, right now, the thing we're announcing is what we're doing to make the change. Now, I argue that the thing to make the change would be different than what we're announcing, which is to focus on getting people to care more and talk more and all this stuff. But we have to look at history. We have to look at any change that has happened over the world. Is it all at once, or is it baby steps? There's an amazing documentary about Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the pioneers of feminism in the U.S. I actually named my daughter after Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And anyways, it's very fascinating because you see from 1848 is when they had their first meeting. You see all these changes that they made because women, for the most part, could not own property. Women could not file for divorce. Men could file for divorce, but women couldn't. If there was a divorce, women could not own their children. The men own the children unless the man would like offer the children to the woman, but I don't think that ever happened. So no owning property, no getting a divorce unless the man wants it, no having your children after the divorce. If your husband dies, his property gets left to the oldest son, not to the wife. Obviously, women couldn't vote, and all these various different things. If from the beginning they said we need all of these things at once, and if it doesn't happen today, it needs to happen tomorrow. If it doesn't happen tomorrow, it's so on and so forth. I don't think any of those things ever would have came through. 20 years into their progress, the law changed to where women could own property, any property they wanted. And then like 10 years after that, the law changed to if women could file for divorce and so on and so forth, and all these different things. And it wasn't until about 10 years after Susan B. Anthony died that women got the right to vote in 1920. And they started in 1848 of trying to get these laws changed. And it seems so clear to me that when people want a big change, and in this case, the comparable thing to veganism would be women to have equal rights with men. But look at all the equal rights that happened over the years while trying to push for this. When they were trying to push this legislation to go through for women to own property, it wasn't like when men go, yeah, I'm on your side, but do you think we should vote? No, I'm not on your side anymore. Like, so if a man's saying, I'm on your side that women should own property, I'm going to stand here and fight with you. And then if that person, then once they're on your side, you start arguing with them about the next thing. They might go, oh, I'm out of here. I'm not for all of women's rights. I'm just for this. I think we just have to pick a thing, not always one at a time, but pick something like ending fur. We could get everybody on board and end fur so quick. But when we talk about fur, we always hop to the next topic. I don't know how to do it, but I don't know. I don't know. What are your thoughts
Well,
with the
look, I
feminist?
mean, the stuff that you're bringing up, I've been in and around left circles for a good portion of my life, and there's these debates are kind of, they're always coming up. Um, you know, should I focus on single issue campaigns or the broad picture? Do we push for reform or for revolution? When do we do one? When do we do the other? Um, so there's so much to discuss there. But I mean, look, I do take kind of a basic Marxist approach to social change. I think it's driven by technology. I think that these things happen. I don't think these things just happen as a result of the human will. Um, like we want them to happen and then they happen. Certain set of conditions have to be met before we go from incremental steps into some kind of critical mass that leads to a revolution, a series of crises, a series of breakdowns, a series of shocks need to happen before you move into a revolutionary situation where everything can change all at once. So um, I feel like there's a distinction to be made between how I approach people as an individual and how I think of them as an individual, and then what's going to best kind of move us towards the bigger goal. So
Mhm.
when it comes to, I feel like what we were discussing before is more like how I would think of individuals. Like I think individuals do need to kind of be nudged along. Um, but at the same time, like I'm not expecting, especially on this particular issue on veganism, I'm not expecting that we're going to hit that critical mass of you know, I don't want to say revolution. I don't think it's going to be a revolution to bring about veganism. Um, but that technological breaking point where everybody is okay with lab-based meat and we can start shutting down these farms, and the traditional meat companies are, they're either adapting to the new technology or they're refusing to adapt, but their concerns are no longer relevant and they're just ignored in favor of this new technology. Either way, but like what we were discussing before was, just uh, I do take your point. Like, you don't want to tell somebody who's not in favor of total emancipation, total liberation now. You don't want to tell them that kind of their half lukewarm support is completely unwanted. I mean, you have to kind of make tactical decisions. Is it better to have this person 50% on board or 0% on board? Like, I
Mhm.
get that. That's a valid consideration. At the same time, um, I think I understand the frustration of people who they look at people like that and they're just like, why aren't you going all the way? Like, what is holding you back? What is your problem? It's usually some stupid reason.
Mhm.
Or just bad reason.
Mhm.
So I understand not wanting to cater to that and give that any credence or value. And so that's how I come to my position of like, well, I'll accept it tentatively, but then let's try to take that next step together. It doesn't have to be today, but
Mhm.
if we're going to continue to be in a conversation and a dialogue over time, I'm going to need to see some progress, or we're going to go our separate ways. You're either moving in the right direction or you're not. And if you're moving too slow, but that's at the individual level, I get. But it's kind of paralleled in the overall situation too. Like, I think we're moving too slowly personally.
Mhm.
Um, 70 to 80 billion animals are being tortured and murdered in horrific ways every year, and the demand for meat is still growing. You
Mhm.
know, so like I'm not gonna, if that's something that doesn't move you to make some changes, then yeah, I mean, I got nothing to say to you.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know if I'm really addressing your point as well as I could think to do, but
No, it's all right. Well, here's the thing, and I think you probably know this as well. The reason that doesn't move so many people is because people don't want to be thought of as bad people. People eat meat. People don't want to change eating meat. So that the idea is, I can't care about these billion animals because those animals are there for us to eat, and that's what they think. And so, yeah, so I don't know the way to get them to not think that way, but that seems to be the problem. But but yeah, I mean, well, one thing to kind of show a little bit of what I mean is if you watch a movie from the 1930s, you'll see the rich people have like foxes around their neck, and you'll see the fox face and the fox feet, and this completely disgusting fur
right,
for wearing. And nobody would do that today. It's thought of as disgusting today. And it's not thought of as disgusting because veganism as a whole won over. It's thought of as disgusting for a handful of reasons, but mostly we just don't need that. And people think of it as sad because they've been convinced to think of it as sad. So I don't know. I think if we just have a push, a friend of mine was telling me that he was at some protest for a SeaWorld type thing, and there was chalk there, and he wrote "Go Vegan" on a sidewalk in chalk. And somebody's like, "Why did you write that? This movement's not about veganism. We're trying to end this SeaWorld thing." And the people that were with him were completely shocked, and half the people there weren't even vegan. They just wanted to end this SeaWorld thing. And I
yeah,
I I could see the idea of seeing them as hypocrites, similar to the people that eat meat that are pissed about that hunter lady that killed that Cecil the lion or whatever.
right.
But it's a group of people that are wanting to end an important element of suffering to animals. So
Well,
yeah.
and that sounds like a good opportunity to just educate and say, well, there's a reason why the vegans are here. This is our
Hmm.
philosophy. This is what we believe. This is this is very important to us as vegans. This is why we're vegans. We don't think animals should be treated this way. And now let me show you how they're treated in all these other places. Let me show you what needs to happen to get most of that meat onto your plate. So if you're upset about this, you don't like this, you don't like the way these creatures are treated, then let's take a look at all these other creatures. Now, there are going to be some people with who are just they're like a brick wall you're never going to get through. But I think
Mhm.
some of the people there would at least start to question that. So I mean, I'm not all for, like if somebody's legitimately asking like, what do you mean by go vegan? Like, why is that here? Yeah, you constructively engage with people. You don't just start screaming and shouting at
Mhm.
people. I'm not suggesting that. I think that's a good that sounds like a good educational opportunity though, and I wouldn't want to squander that either. So there might be some people who, they wouldn't vegans would go to that and they wouldn't even mention that they're vegan. It's
Mhm.
like, well, we're just focused on this one thing today, and we're not going to talk about anything else. And I think
Mhm.
that's a wasted opportunity,
Mhm.
because if you got people who already, you probably get half the people there to at least listen to you, if not more. Um,
Mhm.
I would think so. You got to take those strategic opportunities when they come up,
Mhm.
and not squander them because you don't want to rock the boat or whatever. You see that window, jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think the opposite, but probably only because if something doesn't work, I want to see something new tried. Where if having that opportunity and jumping in, if we could end SeaWorld and get a conversation going about meat stuff with a handful of people, then that's great. But without ending SeaWorld, part of me just thinks there should be a push to end SeaWorld, that we could get as many people on board as we can without pushing those people away. And I think we can do it all at once because we all talk about various different things. Somebody being like a progressive that happens to also be pro-life or something, but everything else they're progressive on. They're not all of a
Uh,
sudden not progressive anymore. And same thing with if somebody's conservative and they're
I,
pro-trans,
I,
you know.
I got to tell you though, is there are some issues where, look, yeah, you can have disagreements on within, progressive or left movement or within any movement. There
Mm-hmm.
are there are certain topics that I think are completely legitimate for people to hash out and debate, but there are certain things where I don't think there are certain things that are non-negotiable. So, like on the left, for many people on the left, like a woman's bodily autonomy is non-negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
And if like, look, if you're like one of those people who like, I'm personally pro-life, I would never have an abortion or support an abortion. If you're a man, I wouldn't support a woman getting an abortion personally. But where do you stand politically? You know, um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's just somebody's personal position. I'm not inclined to say, okay, get the hell out of here.
Mm-hmm.
I would want them to maybe reconsider. Well, I mean, especially in the case of men, like if you're not supporting the women in your life, I think, if that's the decision they want to make.
Well, let's say,
Um,
sorry to cut you off,
but
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 let's say something like drugs.
I want to finish on saying that
Okay.
the personal position, but then if your political position is we need to ban abortion, throw the doctors in jail, and now we're getting to throw the women in jail, some of these red states. Oh, well, then no, you're not a progressive. I'm sorry. Well, not in my view.
Mhm.
So that's it.
Yeah, let's take a smaller topic though. So, like
Sure.
most progressive people would say they want to legalize drugs. I think a lot
Sure.
of conservatives do too, but let's say most conservatives don't. You could be a conservative that wants to legalize drugs, or you could be a progressive that thinks drugs should not be legalized at all, but you're still a progressive. I think it would benefit veganism if, like, I hate the idea of ruining the name of vegan meaning not eating or wearing stuff of animals. But if you had vegans that were like, oh, I don't eat meat or dairy at all, but I eat eggs, or I eat honey, or I don't eat these things, but as long as cows are being killed for their meat, I don't care about leather. Yeah, it's some strange thing. I don't know. Um, but if you had like it, I feel like the movement might work better if veganism was this philosophy where people can people that are outside of veganism would now be part of veganism, and it would like grow as a philosophy that constantly is talked about, in the same sense that you could have progressives that are anti-legalizing drugs, progressives that are Like, I'm sure there's a lot of progressives that are pro circumcision. I'm not sure why, but I'm not sure why
Well,
anybody's pro
yeah,
circumcision, but
that's might be more of a cultural debate. People who
mhm.
might defend something like that as a part of a,
but
a cultural practice.
but they don't get kicked out of the group though. They might be pro circumcision, but
Well,
they're pro
yeah,
bodily autonomy too.
leftists will fight over just about it, and will excommunicate each other over a lot of different things, and sometimes
Mhm.
rightfully so. Like I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure there's an example you could pick that it wouldn't make me kind of cringe, but like if you're a progressive and you're not for legalizing drugs, like if you're for the war on drugs, I don't see how you're progressive. I mean, that's just my view. Like I don't know.
Mhm.
It's like, and look, we're talking about labels here. We're talking about words. So look, if somebody holds progressive positions on like almost every issue, but then they're like, but I'm okay with the war on drugs. Well, do you really care if I think you're a progressive or not? For doing that, for holding that position. Like, look, I'm glad you believe what you believe on the other issues. Okay, let's fight for labor rights. But I'm still going to try and educate you. I'm still going to say, look, you got to understand how this war on drugs is contradicting your other positions. You know how many people get caught up in this web of the state, the police, the courts, the bureaucracies, have their lives just completely upended and ruined by this war on drugs? Like these people that you're trying to help on all these other issues because you're a progressive, all these other things you're fighting for, you're completely undermining with this other position you hold. I can't hold my tongue on that. I can't,
Mhm.
because it's just that it just doesn't. It seems wrong to me to just ignore that oversight. Like, you got a serious blind spot in your thinking, and you might think you have some good reasons for holding that view. And I mean, I'm willing to listen, but at the same time, I just didn't know too much about the consequences of it, in this case the war on drugs. And
Mhm.
like, if like it's hard for me to imagine why you'd be such a hardcore progressive on all these other issues and then just have this block right here. Like, why would you undermine yourself like that? Why would you
Mhm.
undermine the people you're trying to help? That's my view.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm not that much of a pragmatist. At the end of the day, I understand where you're coming from. I do. And but when it comes to me and what I'm comfortable with and not comfortable with, I have to encourage people to go a little further in their thinking.
Mhm. Gotcha. Okay. Um, well, I think we're close to the end here. If you have another 10 or 15 minutes, I am curious to talk about the thing we talked about before recording, which is the
Right.
slaughterhouse workers.
Yeah, kind of ties into what we were just talking about. Just talking about as far as like progressives go and um, workers' rights and things like that. Like it started because I try to avoid reading about slaughterhouses because that's reading about that stuff, let alone seeing it. That can ruin my day. It can ruin my week. I absolutely hate. I mute that stuff on my timeline. I hide it. I don't really want to see it. But then when you're a vegan in online spaces, you're going to see that stuff all the time. You can't get it all.
Mhm.
So, I saw something and it just really set me off, about like some of these slaughterhouse workers, they end up just torturing animals for fun. And I think the job makes them crazy, or maybe they were already sadistic people and this is the line of work they went into. And then, of course, it was pointed out to me that a lot of people in those jobs, they're prisoners or they're immigrants being exploited in a kind of a desperate situation. It's like, okay, well, I'm not talking about those people. Like if you're a slave, which is we have slave labor in the United States, we absolutely do, and it is used for some of the worst jobs in the country, like working in a slaughterhouse, killing animals all day. I mean, those are the kind of jobs that we put prisoners in and other marginalized people into. I understand all that, but I've seen interviews. Okay, I've read interviews with slaughterhouse workers who don't appear to be slaves and who are appearing to relish in the work that they do. And talking about just the horrific things they do to animals because they're bored, because they think it's funny. I don't
Mhm.
even want to repeat the details of it, but it's just beyond horrific. And there are certain lines of work that I think that if you like, unless you're being forced to do it at gunpoint, which arguably some of these people are, if they're prisoners in the United States. Okay, but unless you're in that situation, you shouldn't be doing this work. I
Mm.
don't support that. And that might be an issue, Carson, where somebody says, I'm not a progressive,
Mhm.
oh, you're not supporting those workers. You know, and then I might have to just take the hit on that.
Is the
If they're doing,
idea that they wouldn't be, if they were out of that job, they wouldn't be able to get another job? Is that the thought?
I mean, I think in the case of like when we're talking about non-prisoners, I think that's might be the that might be the thing. I'm just pulling up like some of the things that were said here. And it's like I'm sorry, like I can't. There's only so much empathy I can have because somebody was on there really trying to argue that we need to have empathy for these people because of the situation that they're in. And it's like, okay, well, if you're a prisoner in the United States being forced to do a job that you wouldn't otherwise do, of course, I do have empathy for that. I
Hmm.
absolutely do. But if you took this job, and you could have taken another job or I mean, I don't like saying this, but if it were me and that was the only job available, I'd rather beg for money on the street or eat out of a
Hmm.
dumpster than kill animals all day. Like there's
Yeah.
something wrong with you if that's an appealing line of work to you or a line of work to you that you're just indifferent to. Like, yep, I'm just going to go in and slit the throats of 500 chickens today, and then I'm going to come home and spend time with I mean, there's something wrong with you, in my opinion, if you could
Mm.
just do that and not have it affect your conscience, to have that much blood on your hands. Now, obviously, it's different again if you're being forced to. There are certain things, like, and one of the things I said was, what would the excuse be here, and how much empathy would you be calling for here if it were humans? If it were children,
Hmm.
human children on the assembly line, or not the assembly line, but the conveyor belt, where they're
Mm.
slitting the throats, and then the ones that, because they have to do so many per hour, they don't get them all. So the ones they miss, they get boiled alive.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so if it was little babies getting boiled alive, human babies getting boiled alive, like I think I'm just wondering where that empathy would be then. Um,
Hmm.
I suspect you might not have as much, if any at all.
Yeah, I'd
So
be I'd be curious to see why those jobs are available versus other jobs, like what, like versus maybe farm jobs that don't involve animals, or I don't know who is able to or not able to get certain jobs, but I would say that I don't think we need to keep a business open just because it makes jobs
well,
exist.
of course not. Right.
Like I don't think like I think there's a huge problem in with humans of being completely unhealthy. And I don't think we should be eating fast food whatsoever. I don't think any human should eat fast food. So I would love it if every fast food place closed business tomorrow. Now, that's a crazy amount of jobs. I don't even know what was that, millions of jobs in the US, but we shouldn't just have something exist because the jobs are there. Before fast food ever even existed, there were humans and there were jobs. So I don't know exactly how, I don't know much about the economy and how all that works. But if you, and same thing with, like, we overconsume, people buy endless amounts of TVs and all this, a bunch of garbage we don't need. And if we bought half the stuff we bought, sure, the country's GDP would be lower and there would be less
Yeah.
jobs and less stores and whatever. But the it doesn't mean that we should keep consuming stuff we don't need.
Right. Right.
No.
And just to be clear, I don't think that the people that were interjecting, they weren't necessarily saying that we need to keep slaughterhouses open just because they provide jobs.
Mm.
I mean, they're the people I was arguing with were vegan, but they're saying that we need to empathize with the workers in those jobs because they're often from marginalized, oppressed groups and communities, which is true, like in general. But at the same time, don't gaslight me. I've read the stories, I've read the articles, I've read the interviews. Like, we're not talking about 100% of these people being unwilling slaves who, would absolutely do anything else if they could. I think that's true, maybe most of the time. But there are very clearly, because I mean, unless you're going to say that articles that I've read and the interviews I've read, unless you're going to say that's all fabricated and made up, which sounds ridiculous to me. There are clearly
Mhm.
some people in these jobs who enjoy, or they've come to enjoy and relish in this kind of sadistic behavior, this bloodshed. And it's set if you know, if they went in not being that way and then the job made them that way, that's unfortunate, you know. But it's like, yeah, I mean, when it comes to this thing about, you know, like empathizing with workers, though, it's like, I don't know, cops are workers, soldiers are workers. We oppose, and a lot of people on the left don't have whole lot of empathy for cops. I don't know if you noticed that, you know,
Mhm.
like you know, the cops even have unions. They're unionized workers, but that
Mhm.
doesn't really seem to matter when we're saying abolish the police. Um,
Well,
so
really quick, I am curious. Is the idea that most of the or that a good amount of slaughterhouse workers are undocumented?
Well, that was part of what was said, and I think that is absolutely true. And the GOP right now is trying to lower the age, the working age, you know, the legal age at which people can work, mostly so they can get these minors, these unaccompanied minors, into jobs like slaughtering and meat packing, things that most people don't really want to do. They've got prisoners doing it, they got undocumented. So yeah, they are trying to get more people into those jobs. And I'm absolutely not talking about that. We're talking about some kid who came across the border without any family, and now they're kind of in the web of the state. I mean, they're not
Mhm.
that they're in the same kind of position as a prisoner, like who's, you know, part of like a work program or something like that. Like these, okay, I'm
Mhm.
obviously not talking about those people.
Mhm.
I was only talking about like the people that I've seen and read in these interviews where, you know, they've just lost their humanity. You know, or
Mhm.
maybe that is humanity. I don't know. Maybe we're the ones who are not
So when
really being
you talk about
human.
people like that, the people that want to support the undocumented workers there are just saying that we have to support all the workers because plenty are undocumented.
I mean, it was mostly a call for empathy because I was saying like because I was saying some stuff like I just yeah, I think people who torture animals for fun, I don't have any empathy for them. I think they deserve to be I don't want to say, you know, like they deserve to have bad things happen to them. They should be stopped. They should be punished. Um, but, and so they're saying, well, you know, you got to have empathy for these workers. What? Okay. I'm obviously not talking about the ones who are there against their will. I'm talking about the ones who are having fun, you
Yeah.
know, doing horrible things to animals. They're having fun. And not even part of the slaughter process. I'm talking about, you know, just to satisfy their own bloodlust. I'm not even talking about like bolt gunning or the throat slitting, you know, the just the regular industrialized process, as bad as that is. I'm talking about things they do outside of that to take out their aggression on the
Yeah.
okay. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about extra, you know, outside of work brutality that they have fun with, maybe to keep themselves sane. I mean, they say that's what some of them say, like it's the only way they stay sane on the job is by letting off stress by doing horrible things to animals. So
Mhm.
obviously, big picture, I want all these places shut down, but that doesn't mean like in the short term. Like, no, I'm sorry, don't have empathy for people who do that stuff, for to do those things. You're going out of
Mhm.
their way to inflict extra pain and suffering, cruelty that again, I'm not even going to say some of the things that I've read that they've done. You can go look it up for yourself if you want.
Mhm.
But you can't read that stuff and just not feel overwhelmed with anger and sadness. And you
Mhm.
can't, I can't empathize with somebody who does something like that. And
Mhm.
not even a little bit. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean the fact that anybody would take that job unless it was in such demand that like the job being in demand that they paid a crazy amount for that you'd say I can't pass up this money. Anybody that does it and they're just paid like a normal minimum wage or close to it or something that wants to kill animals, even meat eaters, I don't there has to be something likely wrong with them. I would guess that that you would get like maybe a hillbilly vibe if you went in there and talked to a good handful of them. But yeah, I don't know. I do wonder, I guess, maybe somebody could go in there that just thinks, whatever, it's I eat meat, it's a normal job. And then once they do it, they get like some kind of a thirst for it. How
Yeah.
you'll hear serial killers say, I never intended to kill anybody, but once I did kill this person because I felt like I needed to or whatever, then I needed to do it again. And then they keep doing it. So like maybe somebody that
Yeah.
does it and they get this adrenaline rush and they can't figure it out, but they love killing. Yeah, it's weird.
And at a bare minimum, I mean, empathy or no empathy, they need to be stopped by any means necessary. If you want to throw some empathy on top of that, well, good for you, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just don't have it. I don't
Yeah.
have it. There's a limit, I mean, I support workers' rights, obviously. Like I'm a socialist, but just like most leftists are not gonna have a whole lot of empathy for cops who are brutalizing and terrorizing poor people and minorities, like, oh, where's your empathy? They're just a working man trying to get their paycheck, like I don't hear a lot of that on the left. But when it comes to people who torture animals to death for fun, then I'm supposed to have all this empathy. No, I'm sorry, I
Mm-hmm.
don't. I put them in the same category. In fact, I think they're even worse.
Mm.
So that's just my view.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, it's good talk. And yeah, talk to you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Take care.
Same to you.